Hi everyone. Today we are going to discuss about ruling the countryside. This is a chapter from class 8 history textbook. We shall see how did the English East India Company control the Indian villages to gain more revenue. Right after the victory in the Battle of Buxar in 1764, the control of English East India Company over Bengal became easy. On 12 August 1765, the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam appointed the East India Company as the Diwan of Bengal. It means, as Diwan, the company became the chief financial administrator of the territory under its control. Here we need to remember that Bengal was a rich area in terms of production and revenue. But with the control of East India Company, Bengal began to face a deep crisis. Firstly, the revenue collected in Bengal was used to finance the purchase of goods for export by the East India Company. Now, the company did not import gold and silver from Britain for such purchase or expenses. It means Indian money or revenue was used to buy Indian goods and then export to the other countries. So, no investment, only profit. Secondly, with the company's control, the Indian artisans began to desert or leave their villages since they were being forced to sell their goods to the company at low prices. Thirdly, peasants were unable to pay the dues that were being demanded by the company. Artisanal production and agricultural cultivation declined. Besides, in 1770, a terrible famine killed 10 million people in Bengal. About 1/3 of the population was wiped out. Now the question arises, if the economy was in ruins, could the company be certain of its revenue income? Most company officials began to feel that investment in land had to be encouraged and agriculture had to be improved. But how could it be done? Thus, the company began to discuss and debate about the systematic assessment of production and collection of revenue in India. The result was the three settlements: permanent settlement, Mehalwari settlement, and Rayatwari settlement. Let's begin with permanent settlement.
Let us focus on the important facts that we have to remember in this context. The permanent settlement was the British agrarian policy. The aim was to gain more and more revenue from the countryside or villages. Now, who is collecting the revenue from the British? The answer is zamindars or highest bidder. That is, zamindari was auctioned and highest bidder or the one who promised to pay highest revenue to the British got the zamindari rights. Zamindars were the mediators between peasants and the British East India Company. That is, zamindars collected revenue from peasants and gave it to the British. Next important fact in this settlement, revenue was permanent. It would not change even if the production is more than revenue demand or production is less than the revenue demand. Let us see an example here. If the revenue fixed for a land was 5,000, then zamindar had to give 5,000 to the British. If the production was more, that is 7,000, then zamindar gets the profit of 2,000. But if the production was only 4,000, then zamindar had to bear the loss of 1,000. In case of profit, British expected the zamindars to invest on the improvement of land. Let us summarize all the points here. Lord Cornwallis introduced the permanent settlement in 1793. Zamindars were asked to collect rent from peasants and pay revenue to the company. The revenue was fixed permanently to ensure a regular and secured flow of revenue. After paying fixed revenue, the remaining amount was for zamindar as a profit. Zamindars were motivated to invest in the improvement of land. But in this context, we also need to remember the limitations of the permanent settlement. Firstly, the fixed revenue was so high that the zamindars found it very difficult to pay, and anyone who failed to pay the revenue lost the zamindari rights. The pressure also came on the peasants as they were not able to pay the high revenue to the zamindars. To pay the rent, peasants most often had to go to the money lenders to take loan from them. When a peasant failed to pay the rent, he was evicted from the land he had cultivated for generations. The zamindars who lived in cities were called absentee landlords, who were not there in the villages but settled in cities, were not investing in the improvement of land. They were simply becoming the collectors of revenue. By the first decade of the 19th century, the prices in the market rose and cultivation slowly expanded. And here we see that the permanent settlement had limitation even for the company. So when the cultivation increased and the price of the cultivation or the crops increased in the market, the company could not increase the revenue as it was fixed. So in such a case, the profit of the zamindars increased. So these are the limitations of the permanent settlement. If you have understood, you should be able to give answer of these questions. That is, who is fixing the revenue in the permanent settlement? Could the revenue be changed if the production was more? The highest bidder collects revenue. True or false? What is the role of moneylender? Who introduced the system and when? In case of a natural calamity, will the revenue rate be relaxed or revised? Were the farmers happy? If you are able to answer these questions, it means that you have understood the topic.
Moving on to the Mehelwari settlement.
The Meherwari settlement was the British agrarian policy. The aim was to gain more and more revenue from the countryside or villages in a systematic manner. Now there are certain facts that we need to remember in this context. Firstly, Holt Mackenzie. Holt Mackenzie was the person who had introduced the Mehelwari settlement in the year 1822. Secondly, who was collecting the revenue from the British? The answer is Lambardar or village headman. He was collecting the revenue from the Mehel or village and gave it to the British. Another question is, how much revenue was collected? In this context, we have to remember that the revenue was not fixed. The plots in the village were inspected and measured regularly. The production was estimated and then the revenue demand was decided. The revenue demand would be more in case of more production and the revenue demand would be less in case of less production or in case of any natural calamity. Now let us summarize the important points in context of the Mehelwari settlement. Holt Mackenzie introduced the new Mehelwari settlement in the year 1822. Collector went from village to village inspecting the land and measuring the fields. The estimated revenue of each plot within a village was added up to calculate the revenue from each village or mehel. This demand was to be revised periodically, not permanently fixed. The charge of collecting the revenue and paying it to the company was given to the village headmen or lambardars.
And finally, we come to the Rayatwari settlement.
Rayatwari settlement was the part of British economic policy to get more and more land revenue from the villages. Now, let us start with the word Rayat. It means peasant or cultivator. Another important fact that we should know is that this Rayatwari settlement was also known as Munro system, as Thomas Munro played a significant role in the implementation of Rayatwari settlement in India. As the name suggests, the Rayatwari settlement was the direct settlement or contract between the British and the peasants. It means that there was no mediator or intermediary between the English East India Company and the Indian peasants. The land or fields of peasants were surveyed carefully and then the revenue assessment was made. The peasants had to pay the revenue directly to the British, not through any zamindar or mediator. Now, let us summarize the important points of Rayatwari settlement. It was tried on a small scale by Captain Alexander Red and subsequently developed by Thomas Munro. The settlement was made directly with the cultivators or rayats. The fields of the cultivators had to be carefully and separately surveyed before the revenue assessment was made. Thomas Munro thought that the British should act as paternal father figures protecting the riots under their charge.
Besides all this, over the period of time, the British also realized that the countryside could not only yield revenue, but at the same time, it could also grow the crops that Europe required. How was this done? Let us have a closer look at the story of indigo cultivation.
Many of you must be very fond of indigo prints on fabrics, but do you know that the journey of these prints wasn't very smooth? Indigo producers in India had to suffer and struggle with the harsh conditions imposed by the British planters. So here we come to the topic indigo cultivation during the British rule in India. Let's start from 18th century. When Britain experienced industrial revolution, the production of clothes or cotton increased tremendously, and this increase of production created a new demand for cloth dyes. Soon, indigo plant became popular, which could provide rich blue color for the clothes. Britain desperately looked for a regular source of indigo supply. From where could this indigo be produced? The easiest answer was India. At this time, India was a colony of Britain. British people were expanding their control in India, politically as well as economically. English East India Company decided to use Indians for the production of indigo, which soon turned out to be a big business for British planters with huge profits. But it wasn't very simple. Do you know that most of the Indian farmers were not keen to produce indigo? It was because indigo cultivation exhausted the fertility of soil. Secondly, the money offered by the British indigo planters or rich British commercial farmers was very less, and less profit for Indian peasants meant loans and poverty. Let's see how did it all happen. There were two main systems of indigo cultivation, niche and rayoti. Let's start with niche system of indigo cultivation. Niche means using your own land. In niche system of indigo cultivation, the British planter produced indigo on his directly controlled land, and for labor, Indian peasants were hired. But Englishmen often found the niche system difficult as arranging and managing vast tract of fertile land, labor, plows, bullocks and other resources wasn't very easy. Thus, the British planters looked for an alternative mode of cultivation, that is, the rayoti system. Rayot means peasant. The basic difference in niche and rayoti system was that in niche system, British planters managed all resources on their own, but in rayoti system, all the responsibility was with the Indian peasant. Let's have a look. Under the rayoti system, the British planters asked the Indian peasants or rayots to sign a contract or an agreement called sapta. Those who signed the contract got cash advances or loans from the British planters at low rates of interest to produce indigo. Against this loan, the rayots had to cultivate indigo on at least 25% of their land. After the production of indigo, crop was delivered to the British planter at a very low price. With that small amount or price of the indigo, Indian peasants often found it difficult to pay the previous loan. Then, a new loan was given to the rayot. The cycle of loan and production would continue one after another. But soon Indian peasants realized that the system was harsh and gave all profit only to the British. Let's have a look at this flowchart. The price Indian peasants got for the indigo they delivered to the British was very low, and with the amount they were never able to pay their loans. Thus, the cycle of loans never ended. Thus, indigo cultivation had cruel effects on the Indian farmers, which soon led to rebellions in regions like Bengal, Bihar.
Let's move on to the Blue Rebellion. with the continuous pain and struggles of indigo cultivation. In March 1859, thousands of ryots in Bengal refused to grow indigo. Ryots refused to pay rents to the planters and attacked indigo factories. Those who worked for the planters were socially boycotted. The ryots took pledges that they would no longer take advances to sow indigo. Even the gumastas, that is, the agents of planters who came to collect rent, were beaten up. Many local zamindars and village headmen mobilized the indigo peasants and fought with the Lathials. Lathials were the lathi wielding strongmen maintained by the British planters. Coming to the Indigo Commission. After the revolt of 1857, the British government was particularly worried about the possibility of another popular rebellion. Worried about all these violent acts, the government brought in the military to protect the planters from assault and set up the Indigo Commission to inquire into the system of indigo production. The commission held the planters guilty and criticized them for the coercive methods they used with indigo cultivators. It declared that indigo production was not profitable for ryots. The commission asked the ryots to fulfill their existing contracts, but also told them that they could refuse to produce indigo in future.
Thank you for watching this video. For more such videos, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel Constructing Minds.